Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for SSA for having me here. I'm really glad to be in Sri Lanka. The Rosa Luxemburg Foundation is intensifying its work in Sri Lanka. That is the main reason for me and my team members here of being here, visiting partners, among them SSA, in order to start a new round of projects and more projects, I think, than we have ever done, because now we obviously have a situation in Sri Lanka with a government that is probably a bit more closer to the ideas of our partners and also to our own ideas. What I wanted to do today is I wanted to quickly run you through a few facts and figures around the German elections, and then talk about the rise of the far right in Europe, and I want to give a slightly different interpretation on that, because a lot has been talked about that already. But now I just learned, and this is really breaking news, today in the German parliament, the Bundestag, the new government in the German system, the Chancellor has to be elected through a majority in the parliament. And that decision was due today, and everybody was expecting it to just happen, and we could announce we have a new German government. But now we don't, because actually Mr. Merz, who was the candidate, was not elected. So we have a serious political crisis now in Germany. I mean, the next steps within the German constitution are quite clear. There need to be a second round of voting in the parliament. If Mr. Merz or anybody else who runs, but I just checked the news, and apparently Mr. Merz wants to run again within the next few days, there will be a repetition of this vote. If he's not getting the absolute majority, then there has to be a third round of voting, and in that round a relative majority will be enough. But it is actually quite unexpected that he didn't manage to get all the votes together from the parties. Basically, it's only his own party and another party that will form the next German coalition. What that means for, and how the far right, which is the third strongest, or it's the second strongest party in the parliament, how they position themselves in this crisis will be very interesting. But I show you a few slides so that you have a better overview of what it is. This is I couldn't find a better slide, but this is more or less the election result. So you can see that the black column here is the Christian Democrats. They have 28% of the vote. Then the second party, this is the far right party, the AfD, with 20.8%. The Social Democrats have 16%, the Greens 11%, and Die Linke, this is the party that is affiliated with the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, has actually 8.7. We actually had 8.8 in the end, and all the other parties that are below 5%, they didn't make it into the parliament because we have this threshold of 5%. So on that basis, only one governing coalition. This is probably also important. This one here. You can see here the distribution of the seats in the parliament. So there were only two possibilities of creating a coalition: the Christian Democrats, the black, and the Social Democrats, the red, which is actually the coalition that have now worked on a coalition contract. There would have been another possibility, and that would have been a coalition between the Christian Democrats and the far right. But that was an option that has been excluded by most of the Christian Democrats. I mean, we are guessing now if the people who didn't vote for Mr. Merz, were they the ones who would have preferred to vote with the far right, or were they the ones who didn't like Mr. Merz for his hardline position on immigration, for example. So this is up for speculation. We don't know it at the moment, and since this is an anonymous vote, we will probably never really find out. And so I had yesterday I had put up this caricature here, which is much more actual than ever. So you can see here Mr. Merz in the guise of Count Dracula emerging from the coffin of the former coalition, the traffic light coalition. But what we didn't expect is actually that now the coffin remains closed for a while. So that is the situation now in Germany, which is really dramatic. Because we all thought more or less that at least at this point the German democracy remains fairly stable. There's just one more slide that this is probably also interesting. You can see here that this is the question, how would you view participation of the far-right AfD in the next German government? And you can see that here among the voters of the Christian Democrats, only 16% like that idea, whereas, of course, I mean, the AfD, they want to have participation in the government. So there is very little support for actually a governing coalition with the far right at this point in time. The other slide I wanted to show you is because that is relating to the rise of the far right, and it's important in Europe at the moment. During the election campaign, the focus of this campaign was strongly driven by all parties on irregular migration, which obviously is a topic that has been pushed heavily through by the far right. And you can see here in this slide that, in fact, if you ask the voters what are the topics that were the most important for them, it's rather a big variety of topics. For example, 18% said internal security, 18% said social security, then 15% said actually migration, 15% said economic growth, 13% said climate and environment, 13% said peace, then 5% said rising prices, and so on. One can say that actually the focus in the electoral campaign mostly on illegal immigration did not reflect what are actually the concerns of the voters. And I think to some extent that was one of the reasons why the Linke party, the left, fared much better than anybody would have expected, because the Linke ran a campaign that was very strongly focused on day-to-day sorrows of the people, mainly actually rising housing prices and high inflation, and that combined with a few other things, for example, a very successful social media campaign, some fresh candidates, some young candidates who came out very strongly on social media, brought the success to the left. But, well, this is now the situation in Germany. And I think does anybody have a question on these slides? Or otherwise I would go on and we'll do the discussion later. It's probably better, no? Yeah? Good, so then I can close this here. Germany, of course, is one of the European countries, but actually almost all the European countries are now in a situation where the far right is either already part of the government or plays a very important role even outside the government, because they are able to set the tone. And with the election of Donald Trump and actually what Donald Trump is doing, this has even increased. So what I want to do is, this is a bit of an essayistic presentation that I'm giving now. I am trying to look at the rise of the far right through three different theoretical lenses. That is an interpretation of Sigmund Freud, of the Israeli historian Seif Sternhell, and of Max Horkheimer and Theodor Adorno's work, The Dialectic of Enlightenment. So I'll just start with the sentence. The far right has been on the rise in Europe and in the US for more than 2 decades now. I prefer to speak of the far right instead of right-wing populism, as it was termed for a long time, as it has become increasingly clear that most of these parties are not only harvesting discontent, they want a different world. And in this context, it's probably also very important that just last week, the German spy agency, who has been observing the AfD for a very long time, has just brought out a very lengthy dossier of more than 1,000 pages that actually declares the AfD party as a right-wing extremist party, which could probably be the foundation for a move to get the party banned by the Supreme Court in Germany. This needs a move. It needs to be brought to the court, and then the court will have to decide. We don't know whether this will happen and if the court will decide in that direction. But that is also a very important development that just took place now. It is important to see, because in the discourse it's often not clear, and that is part of the strategy, that these parties are not conservative parties, even if there are overlapping talking points. Their plan to disrupt the establishment is the very contrary, in my opinion, of a conservative worldview. And on the question if conservative parties realize the difference, hinges in a way the democratic system and the survival of conservative parties themselves. In many countries such as France, such as Italy, traditional conservative parties almost vanished already under the onslaught of right-wing parties. In Germany, the AfD very clearly says that they want to destroy the Christian Democratic parties. The Tories in the UK are also not doing all too well at the moment. This is really probably the most important battlefield, whether conservative parties will be able to gain back some of their constituencies from the far right. Oops. Hello? Wait. Hello? Hello? Now it's working again. What I'm going to do now is I just want to give you a short description of the canvas on which the rise of the far right is playing out in Europe. And in the second step, I'll go with you through these different theoretical interpretations that might, give a bit of food for thought how to read this. The big canvas. What we are experiencing geopolitically at the moment is the decline of Western power, the end of the post-World War II global order that was shaped in many ways in order to ensure the dominance of the former colonial powers. Another important crisis is the climate crisis that profoundly threatens our way of life, if not life on this planet as such. And the third point I would like to mention is the ascent of the new technology, artificial intelligence, whose future implications we still not fully understand yet. In order to underscore the scope of the crisis, I would like to refer here to the concept of the 3 narcissistic insults of humankind that Sigmund Freud has introduced. These insults profoundly changed the way how humans see themselves, although I must say that it is a very Eurocentric concept and probably would not apply in other contexts, but since I'm speaking about Europe mainly and on the decline of the West, I think allow me to use this lens. So the 3 narcissistic insults to humankind in Freud's view were the cosmological insult when Copernicus found that the Earth is not the center of the universe. It's of course a view that shaped our way of thinking for many 1,000 years. So that was the cosmological insult. Then the biological insight, when Charles Darwin developed the theory of creation and sees that humans are actually not the crown of creation, but they are just a biological chain, and apes are our nearest relatives. And then there was the psychological insult, where Freud puts himself, because he believed that he was the one who found out that the ego is not lord in its own house, and he pointed out the role of the subconscious. I mean, obviously, speaking in a Buddhist country, there were many others who also knew that the ego is not the lord in its own house, but that's a different issue. So, and I would like to add now two new insults, and I believe in a way these insults are driving a nagging discontent, and this is the insult of artificial intelligence and the fear actually that will take away probably one of the last residues of human exceptionalism, and that is the power of the human intellect. We don't know actually where artificial intelligence will end us in. It will surely take away many jobs. We can also see the climate crisis as a narcissistic insult, as we now know that the capitalist system, the exploitation of our planet Earth cannot be continued endlessly without ruining the basis of our own existence. It is calling into question the very way of our economic production. I mean, as leftists, we already knew that there is a problem with capitalism, but now probably other parts also understand that without being able to give an answer to that, that is different from denial. So. I try to cut it a bit shorter because we're getting longer. Yeah, I should also mention that, yes, while the crisis, the climate crisis is largely denied by the far right, digital technologies are, on the other hand, uncritically embraced by them, driven by interests, business interests of what Yanis Varoufakis has called the techno-feudalist class that has been gaining enormously from digital technologies and basically a new model, a new capitalist model of a rent-seeking technologist model that Varoufakis called feudalist. I cannot go into the details now, but basically it's a model that where you actually are able to make enormous profits without actually producing anything. So we are undoubtedly in the middle of a new industrial revolution, and probably for the first time this will take away jobs not only from the labor class, but also from middle classes and intellectuals. Translators, journalists, academia, the art world are already changing dramatically under the onslaught of artificial intelligence. And social media have already changed what Adorno has called the cultural industry, the means to influence masses through media. And it's not by chance that the far right were the first to notice what a useful tool social media are. We can see that on a large scale in Europe, but also in India, where actually almost all the progressive parties are lagging behind and losing in elections because they haven't been able yet to tap into the voter potential that is there on social media. So this has also brought about a change, and that is relevant for Europe because these tech giants, be it Google, Meta, Tesla, Apple, and so on, and increasingly also companies from China, most of them are based still in Europe or in China, And this has led to economic consequences already. In 2008, Europe's economy was largely 90% the size of the US economy, and today it's only 65%. Europe as a continent doesn't actually have the access to the means of this new productive revolution that is happening, and that's putting Europe in a very dire situation at the moment. Still, economically, compared to many other parts of the world, Europeans are doing quite well, but inflation and rising prices, especially for housing, are putting enormous pressure on the younger generation, also added through the rapid aging of societies in Europe. So all of this has created a deep sense of crisis among Europeans. Aging is one aspect of it, and the other aspect of it, and then now we come to that topic of immigration that has been so successfully used by the far right, because obviously immigration is happening on a much larger scale now in Europe. It's also adding to cultural conflicts, but at the same time, everybody who is dealing with these issues knows that because of the rapid aging of the population, Europe will not be able to hold up some of its basic public services, be it healthcare, be it public transport or agriculture. Without immigration, these jobs cannot be filled. There are already many jobs that cannot be filled in Europe because there's not enough immigration yet, but still, the far right has pushed for restrictions in immigration. The same is also happening, of course, in the US, but I'm not talking here about in the US. I'm having a European lens here. So in this context, just let me list you this quickly. In Austria, the far-right party was almost on the verge to becoming the main party in the government. In the last minute, they voted for some other person than this FPÖ person as a chancellor. In Italy, there's also already the neo-fascist Fratelli d'Italia. Giorgia Meloni is a neo-fascist prime minister. In France, Marine Le Pen was about to, was on a good path to actually succeed President Emmanuel Macron. Now she has been taken out of the race by a court ruling because on her misappropriation of funds from the European Union, but that will probably not minimize the number of voters who will actually vote for the far right in the next elections in France. In the Netherlands, there's already a right-wing populist government. In Sweden, the Sweden Democrats are part of a government, and in Germany, the AfD is not yet, but there is an enormous fear, and that is also psychologically not good, that if the current government, the new government, will not succeed, we will even have more people voting for the AfD, which would probably put her into the position to become the strongest party, which is quite worrying. So, after Brexit, most of the far-right parties in continental Europe have given up their strong opposition against the European Union, probably because most of them understood that actually there is money in the EU, and it is better to gain from that these resources that are still there than leaving it. For example, Giorgia Meloni has dropped her anti-EU rhetoric. Marine Le Pen did so. And even those who are obviously opposed to European liberal democracy, such as Viktor Orban in Hungary, still remain members of the EU because they gain enormously financially from it so far. So all of these parties are riding high on anti-immigration sentiments, anti-Muslim prejudices, and are capitalizing on an often deep-rooted racism, although, and that is an interesting shift, actually, many of them explicitly pretend to be not to be anti-Semitic. However, the war in Gaza has produced a heavy wave of anti-Semitism in Europe of both types. There is an old European anti-Semitism, and then there is a fairly new Islamic anti-Semitism that can be seen among many of the Muslim immigrants in Europe. Other rallying points of these parties are an enmity to the so-called wokeism, antipathy to gender politics, feminism, post-colonialism, and climate skepticism. While these are counter-reactions to changing power relations between the West and the rest of the world, between men and women, gender fluidity, the economic and political rise of former colonies, and between man and nature in the time of rising global temperatures, the question remains, why do so many European citizens vote for parties that do not offer solutions to any of these problems? The German electoral campaign, as I already said, was dominated strongly by a focus on irregular immigration, and the greater picture of the changing global order, the energy transition that is required, was almost absent in all the electoral campaigns in this year. Instead, the far right advocates for remigration, meaning forced eviction of foreigners. I mean, you can already see what Trump is doing. Some of these parties in Europe are dreaming of the same, wishing to create again ethnically homogeneous European societies, as they believe it was the case in the past. I would, as an attempt to answer this question, I would like to bring in two lenses here of different theorists. One is Zeev Sternhell, who is an Israeli historian who escaped the Holocaust as a child in Poland, and who has extensively worked on fascism in Europe, mainly in France and Italy. And his unique reading of fascism, now is it back? Yeah. Is that he treats it as what he calls a recurrent possibility of European political thought, and not an aberration of the 20th century. And this is why I find that this is a useful way of looking at it. It helps to understand that fascist thought never really vanished from Europe. For a long time, it was relegated to the fringes, of course, as a result of the Hitlerism, the Holocaust, and the breakdown of the German state after the war. But it survived and now emerges as what Sternhell calls as a sign of crisis of modernity. So he argues that fascism always is a possibility that comes up when modernity is going through a crisis. Fascism possesses, in his view, a coherent ideology with deep roots in European civilization. Long before it became a political force, it was a major cultural phenomenon. He asserts that although fascist ideology was grounded in a revolt against Enlightenment, it was not a reactionary movement. It represents instead an ideological alternative to Marxism and liberalism, and competes effectively with them by positing a revolt against modernity. So Sternhell argues that the conceptual framework of fascism played an important role in its development. Building on radical nationalism and an anti-materialist revision of Marxism, fascism sought to destroy the existing political order and to uproot its theoretical and moral foundations. At the same time, its proponents wish to preserve all the achievements of modern technology and the advantages of the market economy. Nevertheless, fascism opposed every bourgeois value, and this is why the conservative parties play such an important role. So fascism opposes every bourgeois value, be it universalism, humanism, progress, natural rights, and equality. So thus, as Sternhell shows, fascists adopted the economic aspects of liberalism but denied its philosophical principles in the intellectual and moral heritage of modernity. So if you look at what is happening under Donald Trump, you can see almost all the aspects that Sternhell brings up. The political rhetoric and practice of disruption, the focus on new technology augmented by tech billionaires, the exclusion of those who seem to be weak, migrants, women, queer people, religious minorities. Elon Musk's meddling into German elections by supporting the far right AfD was just the latest sign of the fact that the European far right is ideologically at par with the Republicans under Trump. If there are still Republicans at all, I don't know. So that is the Sternhell lens, and I would like to conclude with the adoption of another lens. That is a reference to Horkheimer, Adorno, and the dialectic of enlightenment. The problems posed by the rise of fascism with the demise of the liberal state and the market constitute the theoretical and historical perspective that frames the overall argument in the book, Dialectic of Enlightenment. And the two theses of this book are, as some of you might know, that myth is already enlightenment, and enlightenment reverts to mythology. If European enlightenment and the French Revolution, with its values of liberté, égalité, and fraternity, are the foundations of modern European political thought, Horkheimer and Adorno perceive the collapse or regression of reason, the rise of National Socialism in Germany. That was, of course, the context under which they wrote this book. They perceive the collapse of reason in Germany under Hitler into something resembling the very forms of superstition and myth out of which reason had emerged. That is what Horkheimer and Adorno called dialectic of enlightenment. Modern philosophy became over-rationalized and an instrument of technocracy, and as a result, falling back into myth. If we apply this description to the way the European Union and most European countries have been functioning in the past decades, we can clearly see from where the current backlash comes. The European Union, that started as an elite project from the beginning, developed into a technocratic body far removed from European citizens. Its lack of democratic legitimization was based on the so-called TINA politics, TINA standing for there is no alternative, TINA politics in Brussels and in various European governments, among them, for example, the government of former Chancellor, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, that led to an irrational swing in the other direction. The COVID crisis gave way to large-scale conspiracy theories fired up by scaremongering in the name of protection of citizens. A deep mistrust has settled into some relevant parts of the electorate, and I think this now actually goes far beyond those who actually vote for the far right. I think you see part of this among the Christian Democrats as well, and other parties. This deep mistrust has settled into some parts of the electorates to whom everything seems to be better than the bureaucratic status quo. Horkheimer Adorno, under the still fresh influence of the Holocaust, argue that anti-Semitism is a deeply rooted irrational phenomenon that stems from the failure of the Enlightenment project and the inherent contradictions of bourgeois society. I would like to argue here that today anti-migration sentiments, xenophobia and Islamophobia have replaced anti-Semitism in the current political discourse in Europe, although anti-Semitism surely persists. Horkheimer and Adorno argue that at that time Jews, and probably now migrants, especially from Muslim countries, serve as a universal scapegoat onto which individuals and societies project their deepest fears, anxieties, and neuroses. According to their analysis, the complex and often contradictory nature of modern life generates a sense of alienation, powerlessness, and psychological distress. Unable to confront these feelings directly, people seek to externalize them by identifying a tangible other to blame for their problems. Jews or migrants with their marginalized status become an ideal target for this projection. By attributing their own negative impulses to them, the majority population is able to maintain a sense of psychological coherence and moral purity. This irrational projective hatred is reinforced by economic resentment and nationalistic ideology, which provide a broader social framework for anti-Semitism. Ultimately, Horkheimer and Adorno see the persecution of Jews as a symptom of the unresolved contradictions and pathologies of modern society that must be addressed through a radical critique of the Enlightenment project and the social conditions that sustain it. Applied to the current situation in Europe, the emergence of techno-feudalism as the dominant mode of production has created social contradictions that are perceived increasingly untenable by a part of the electorate that has now again turned to fascism. We therefore urgently need to renew the threefold promise of the Enlightenment, that is freedom, equality, and brother and sisterhood. So I'll leave you with this. Thank you very much.